So the truth is, sport-specific training in the gym is actually overrated. And in this video, I'm going to tell you why that is and what you should be doing instead. Firstly, I appreciate that some of you might not know what I'm talking about when I say sport-specific training, but all I'm referring to is strength and conditioning that you're going to do in the gym that you're hoping is going to translate over to your sport to make you better at said sport. Whether that be football, rugby, boxing, any sport under the sun, there's strength and conditioning you can do in the gym that's going to improve you when it comes to performance in your sport, which is obviously the goal for every athlete from all levels, starting from amateur up to elite. If you want to get better at your sport, you need to focus on your strength conditioning. That's not up for debate. But there's a couple of big problems that focusing on sport-specific training, getting lost in this phrase, can cause. And number one is that people take this way too literally. Now, a good example to use is the sport of boxing, and that's what I'm going to use with these exercises. Because just because an exercise looks like something you do in the sport doesn't actually make it good for you, or is not going to make you better at that specific thing. Now, boxing, the classic one, has been used even by pro boxers over the years, and it's punching with dumbbells. Now, is this exercise technically sport specific? Yes, because you're loading a punch, and obviously in boxing that's what you do nearly all of the time. But there's a big problem with it, because what it does actually changes your punching mechanics. And it's actually, because the gravity of the dumbbell is almost going to pull you down, it's essentially going to mean that you punch slightly differently with and without the dumbbells, which means it's completely pointless because it's not translating over to how you'd actually fight someone. Another exercise in boxing that's similar is landmine punches. Now, these look, if anything, a little bit better because we're a little bit more explosive because we can let go of the landmine, but there's a couple of problems here. A, the landmine is going to be too light for you to get stronger, and it's also going to be too heavy for you to get faster, which means we're in no man's land between those two things, meaning you're not going to be stronger and you're not going to be able to punch faster. And those two things are something you want to attain. So as another exercise that looks good in terms of mimicking the mechanic of a punch, but doesn't actually perform too much benefit. So when people get really caught up on trying to find exercises that are exactly like what they're going to do in their sport, it can really go awry. For example, if you're a golf player, you're always going to come in and just do a load of cable chops. Or, let's take another example, you're a footballer. You don't see footballers attaching a cuff to their ankle on the cables and just kicking as hard as they can, trying to improve the power of their kicks and the speed they can make the ball travel. Okay, that's not how it works. So the number one problem, and the reason why sport-specific training is overrated, is because that people think of it too literally from an exercise per exercise basis, but this isn't actually the biggest factor that stops people making progress. You see, the problem this causes is that people get way too caught up about whether the exercises they're doing are sport specific or not. And you need to be thinking about it from a different viewpoint. And that is not what sport specific exercises can I do, it's how can I make my training sport specific? And there's a difference there. If we're talking about training as a whole, you always want to think about the big picture, and it's thinking about whether each little exercise is sport specific is not going to help you. Because then you're just going to end up doing the exercises like I just showed you, and you're going to be leaving a lot of gains on the table when it comes to your strength and conditioning, which no one wants. And because you want to be getting bang for your buck, you want to be getting best results in minimal time possible, and those exercises are not going to help you do that at all. Now, I've just told you that these are bad, but you might be asking, Daniel, what should I do instead then? Well, luckily, I'm going to tell you that too. And you need to understand about the foundations of what actually not only make us healthy, but they can help us make good performance gains too. And there's two things you absolutely have to have. You need to know your sleep and need to know your macros. Above all else, making sure you have enough calories, enough protein, fueling with carbohydrates before a game, that sort of thing. And also making sure that you sleep like an adult and you're not just having 3 hours of sleep and going out partying all the time. If you want to make long-term gains, these two things you need to make sure you've got. Then, what's very closely behind is your heavy compounds. That is your squats, your deadlifts, and your pressing movements in particular. If you have to prioritize one of these, I'd prioritize squats maybe slightly over the others. But ideally, you want heavy squats at least once per week. You want heavy hinge, so deadlift, RDL, and you want a pressing movement. Depending on the sport, for example, if you're doing rugby, I'd say a bench press will be great because it can help with your handoff strength. Things like that can be really beneficial. So these three things, I'd say, are the three pillars that are going to inform your whole training program. Only once you've got these nails do you move on to the next few bits. And that's when you can start throwing in some sprinting. Again, this isn't too far behind heavy compounds at all. But when you want to get faster, especially if you're in a team sport, you then need to be sprinting. And you want to do this a lot. So you want to be really focusing on acceleration primarily, in most cases, obviously depends on your sport. And you want to be doing efforts of about 30 to 50 meters for probably 4 to 5 sets a couple of times a week. A good starting point, because obviously you don't want to overtrain. Then you can start thinking about maximal jumping. Now, you probably want between 30 and 50 of these per week, spread out across sessions. And then from there, you can do things like your plyometrics, loaded medicine ball throws, loaded jump, that sort of thing. This stuff comes at the top of the pyramid. So this is like the fluff, okay? The stuff we need to nail: sleep, macros, heavy compounds. Once you've got these 3 nailed, then focus on sprinting. Once you've got those 4 nailed, then you can start thinking about adding in the other things. And we're not even talking about aerobic conditioning here. A lot of the time, you can get a good amount of conditioning from just playing your sport, but that does depend how many times a week you train, etc., etc. But that's more a conversation for a different day, okay? That will come around after the sprinting, so I'm not going to go into that too much right now. But you need to understand this pyramid, because this is what's going to inform your training the best. In today's video, I've shown you why sport-specific exercises can be overrated. Now, this doesn't mean every exercise that looks like the sport is bad, but what it does mean is that you need to make sure you're thinking about your training as a whole, as opposed to each exercise. You need to make sure you've got prioritized in terms of that foundational pyramid first. Now, I've spoken more about strength and power today, because this is usually where I see the problems with these sport-specific exercises occur. And there's another side to strength conditioning, which is the conditioning side of things, which I've touched on a lot less. So if you do want to see a video covering conditioning for sports, then absolutely please leave me a like on this video, and obviously make my day if you're willing to give me a subscribe as well. But other than that, I'm going to leave you to it, and I hope you have a lovely day.